Today, I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth. Who said that? Lou Gehrig. Famous farewell speech at Yankee Stadium. I think the year was 1939, but I don't remember it all that well. I was just a wee little lad at the time, so it's been a hot minute since 1939. But no, I think that's when it was. He'd been recently diagnosed with a disease that would be named after him, Lou Gehrig's disease, after breaking all the records for longevity and just the redefining about how baseball was even played to some extent, and had this awesome career. And then I don't know that we could say it was cut short, but maybe he had more left in the tank, but the disease took it from him. And here's a guy who had all the athletic ability in the world, had the skills to handle the difficult New York market in sports. That's not an easy place to play and be a part of, even back then. And yet, under the shadow of Ruth and others, he emerged as this great athlete. He loses it all with this disease, and yet he recognizes God's goodness. He says, today I'm the luckiest man on the face of the earth. He saw how good he had it. What a great farewell speech, one of my favorite of all time. But there's some other farewell speeches I like as well. Here we have Jimmy Valvano. He spoke at the ESPYs back in the 1990s. He's a famous college basketball coach, was on his way to superstardom, had already won some championships, was doing great when he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And so this is 3 months before he passed away. He gave his final speech, and he talked about the setting up of the Jimmy V Foundation, which would be a cancer research foundation. And not only that, they had a slogan, don't give up, don't ever give up. And that became the model for him, and his legacy still lives to this day. There's an award named after him. The foundation is still highly functioning and continuing its research to help combat cancer. But there's another one. Let's take it a little bit closer to home. We have Jack Buck here in St. Louis. Though not a final farewell speech per se, one of the last quotes from him comes from his wife, and she asked him, if you could ask God one question, what would it be? And he said, I would ask God, why have you been so good to me? I love it. I love it. There are so many great farewell speeches that have been shared. Farewell speeches are unique from any other speech. They're unique because a person is sharing with their audience their final thoughts. The things that matter most to them. The things that they hold dear, and they want to make sure that those thoughts are shared kind of in memory of them. And so if I were to ask you, what elements would you want to include in your farewell speech? What might they be? So just roll those around in your brain for a minute. If I was going to give a farewell speech, whether it would be on a stage in front of people, whether it would be a letter I would write, a book, what would be the things I would want to share? And as you go through it, I think of anybody who goes through a near-death experience. If they have the opportunity to share a message with somebody, they almost all say the same thing. Tell my family I love them. Like they want to make sure that that message gets shared loud and clear. And that's a good message. That's a nice thing to say. But ultimately, it's the life you lived up to that point that gives that message any weight or not. You know, if you completely ignored your family, you didn't care about them, you didn't meet their needs, you didn't invest in them, and then you say, tell my family I loved them, that's kind of shallow. It doesn't really ring true. But if you lived a life of faithfulness, even if you don't get to say that final word, it's obvious by the way you lived that you loved your family. So ask yourself the question, consider as we go through this today, if I was to give a farewell speech, what might it look like? You know, there were lyrics from a song that was written, I think it was in the mid-'80s by Steve Green before he passed away, I believe in a plane crash, kind of one of those very unexpected freak accidents. He was really big in the worship scene. He was going around writing new songs, really connecting people with new worship music. And one of the songs he wrote was called Find Us Faithful. And it began with these lines, we're pilgrims on a journey of the narrow road, and those who've gone before us line the way, cheering on the faithful encouraging the weary, their lives a stirring testament to God's sustaining grace. Surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us run the race, not only for the prize, but as those who've gone before us, let us leave to those behind us the heritage of faithfulness passed on through godly lives. Oh, may all who come behind us find us faithful. May the fire of our devotion light their way. May the footprints that we leave lead them to believe, and the lives we live inspire them to obey. Oh, may all who come behind us find us faithful. So what would your farewell speech look like? What elements would you want to include? Well, as we close out our series today, finishing up the life of Joshua, Joshua has the opportunity to give a farewell address in Joshua chapters 23 and 24. So if you have your Bibles, we are going to be in page 236 today. So that's in the pew there in front of you. On the sides, I got some of those for you. If you have your phone, get that out. That's great. If you have your own copy with you, even better. Page 236, though, if you're going to use the one right there in front of you. And we're going to look at some of the verses. We obviously don't have time to read both chapters. That would take up the bulk of our time. So I hope you read it in preparation for today. If not, hope you'll take time to read it this afternoon. But we're going to find this very unique farewell address because Joshua doesn't spend a lot of time talking about himself. Yes, it shows up in there a little bit, but by no means is it the focus. You see that a lot, like when presidents leave office especially, they almost always want to list their accomplishments and the things that they did, and I did this and I did that, and that's fine, whatever, but not Joshua. That's not his concern. His concern is calling the people in front of him to have a strong understanding of what's going on after he leaves. That they would be prepared to make some decisions as he prepares to leave this life. He shifts the focus from himself to those who come behind him. And he does it with three very simple words. The first word is this: consider. Consider. Life is all about considering choices. So let's go to that page 236. We're going to be in chapter 23 there. We're going to pick it up in verse 14. Joshua says, "Now I am about to go the way of all the earth." Translation, I'm going to die. "You know with all your heart and soul that not one of all the good promises the Lord your God gave you has failed. Every promise has been fulfilled, not one has failed." When you repeat something back to back, that is for emphasis that you don't want your audience to forget. This was really important to Joshua, and so he repeats it twice. God's promises do not fail. There, let's pick it up now in verse 15. "But just as all the good things the Lord your God has promised you has come to you, so he will bring on you all the evil things he has threatened until the Lord your God has destroyed you from this good land he has given you. If you violate the covenant of the Lord your God, which he commanded you, and go and serve other gods and bow down to them, the Lord's anger will burn against you, and you will quickly perish from the good land he has given you." Now notice, he's talking about the good land God has given them. This is the promised land that we've already discussed and been talking about throughout this series. God was taking his people out of Egypt, and he was taking them from a life of slavery to one of freedom in a land God had prepared for them. This was their Canaan, is what it's literally called. This was their promised land. And this whole series has been about claiming God's promises for our lives. God has promises for us. No, that's not promises for health and wealth and all the good things that make the temporary life good. Though those things are possible, that's not the promise. The promise is to follow God and receive his blessings, which are far greater than any temporary blessings of this world. And so the first thing that Joshua does here is he says, you need to consider before you what it means to follow God or follow the ways of the world. Following the ways of God bring great blessing. You experience his promises. But following the ways of the world lead to curses, lead to challenges, lead to punishment. And this is a real thing we need to think about, because there is a whole section of Christianity that doesn't believe in the concept of free will. And this is a real problem. The idea of free will is that God has given each person the ability to choose to follow him or not. Now, if you've never talk to anybody about free will if you've never thought about it that much? That seems obvious enough. You wake up every day and make choices. I'm going to brush my teeth or not. I hope you chose to brush your teeth. That would be good. You're going to choose to go to work or not. If you're scheduled to go to work, I hope you go. I'm going to choose to go to church or not. I'm so glad that you're here today. And so the list goes on and on. We make choices all day. And the whole premise of those choices is we have the freedom to choose those choices or not. But there is a branch of Christianity, it's often referred to as Calvinism, where it is the belief that we don't actually have the choice, that our lives are already mapped out. And in fact, God is so detailed with the map. He has chosen some people to be saved ahead of time, and He's chosen everybody else to be condemned ahead of time, and your choices are just simply reflecting what God has already chosen for you. Now, if that's new words to you, new territory to you, that's a little overwhelming, and I get it. But if you've heard about it before, you're familiar with the phrase total depravity. And what that means is, in your sinful nature, you are so depraved, you are so low, that you can't do anything good unless God elects you to do something good. And therefore, if you are not elected, you are automatically condemned. Now, this was overwhelming to me. When I first heard this, I thought, well, there's nobody in their right mind who believes this. This is crazy. And then I had somebody very recently, in the last few weeks, say, hey, would you read this book called Reformed Theology by R.C. Sproul? I knew he was a Calvinist, and I said, okay, I'll read it. And I didn't read all of it, but I read enough of it. And it was a real insightful read to what they believe. Ultimately, there's no free will in Calvinism. Now, you'll usually find these in Southern Baptist churches, but there are some free will Baptist churches as well. In fact, I talked to the minister right here in Crestwood at the Crestwood Baptist Church, Lance Long. Great guy. If you've never met him, I hope you get a chance to at some point. Really phenomenal. And I had a chance to talk to him about this. And he said, well, what's going on right now is in certain universities, the professors are really pushing Calvinism on this hard line, and a lot of the young preachers coming out have bought into it, and they're preaching it very strongly right now. They don't hold to that doctrine at their particular church, but a lot of them do. And it's a real problem for a number of reasons, but mainly is if there's no freedom of choice, then there is really no accountability for our actions. If I don't have a choice to choose to follow God or not, then is it really just that I would be punished for doing wrong? If you were taken into a court of law and you were being charged with a crime, we'll say murder, and you don't have the choice to murder somebody, you just had to do it, like, is it just to put you in prison? Are you accountable for your actions? That's the real question here. Our whole court system is built on the idea that you have freedom to choose to behave one way or another, and when you choose to behave poorly, you are punished for it. Now, I'm going to take it to one book I read that I think is very insightful, and then we're going to move on from this because I don't want to get in the weeds of this too long, but I think it's important that we have a really good understanding on this topic. David Burkott wrote a couple different books. One of them is called Will the Real Heretics Please Stand Up? And what it is, it's a look at our faith today in light of early Christianity. And here's what that means. He went back to the first authors after the Bible was written, the early church fathers, and he wants to investigate what did they believe about, we'll say, what do they believe about predestination and free will? That's in here. What do they believe about baptism? What do they believe about prayer? What do they believe about church structure? They dive into all these topics and to see if what we practice today is consistent with what they practiced back then. Because surely those who lived in the 100s knew the words of Jesus and applied them more accurately than those of us who lived 2,000 years later. And here's what he says about free will. For if it is predestined that one man be good and another man evil, then the first is not deserving of praise or the other to be blamed. Unless humans have the power of avoiding evil and choosing good by free choice, they are not accountable for their actions, whatever they may be. The early church father Clement put it this way: neither praise nor condemnation, reward or punishment are right if the soul does not have the power of choice and avoidance, if evil is involuntary. It's like if you had an older brother, which I do, and he was bigger and stronger than me, and when I was really little, he would grab my wrist and he would smack me in the face with my own hand. He'd say, Mark, why are you hitting yourself? Mark, why are you hitting? I'm not hitting myself. Yes, you are. I don't have a choice. You're bigger than me, stronger than me. I can't stop it unless I yell for Mom. And I tried to avoid that as much as possible, but sometimes, situations got dire, and so I had to. But no, I'm not hitting myself. He's making me hit myself. Well, that's kind of what the idea of no free will means. God is making you hit yourself, and then you're being punished for hitting yourself. It's not how God works. In fact, the most famous Bible verse of all time, John 3:16, is based on the idea of free will. For God so loved the world. Now, last time I checked, the world means everyone. For God so loved everyone that he gave his one and only Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. The idea is you have the choice to respond to God's love or not. It is a choice you have to make. If you don't have free will, then it's simply not consistent with the rest of the Scriptures. I have more notes and more I could say on it, but I'm afraid I'll be going down this rabbit hole way too long, so I don't want to do that. The whole idea that Joshua is sharing with the nation of Israel at this point is you need to consider the choices before you. There are choices that bring about God's blessing, and there are choices that bring about condemnation. So you need to really consider what it is you're going to do with your life. And we firmly believe that you have the opportunity to choose to follow God or not. You need to consider it. But then after you consider it, you need to choose. After you consider it, you need to choose. Are you going to follow God or not? So let's go ahead to chapter 24 now. We're going to pick it up also in verse 14. And here's what it says. Now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods of your ancestors that they worship beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, but serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So here we have probably the most famous verse out of the book of Joshua right here. Choose this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. People have that verse hung up all over their house. It's all over Hobby Lobby. If you've gone there, that's everywhere on every decoration you want to buy. It is available for you to see it. And Joshua says you need to choose this day. And Joshua says, here's what I'm doing, but you need to make a choice for you. And in fact, 5 times in 2 verses, Joshua says the word serve or serving. And so what he's saying is you are going to serve someone or something in your life. You're going to serve God or you're going to serve yourself. At the end of the day, those are the only 2 options. So who or what are you going to serve is really the question. And he kind of lays out 3 options. We have, first of all, the gods of tradition. The gods of tradition. So they had spent 400 years in the land of Egypt. They've been out now maybe 45, 50 years at this point. And you have to imagine that there have been some traditions that they learned in Egypt that are still handed down. Some things that maybe they're practicing that aren't good. Maybe great-grandma worshiped the god of the Nile. Or great-grandpa worshipped, whatever the god of the crop was. Or the fertility god. Like they worshiped these gods potentially while they were in Egypt. And sometimes those traditions will follow you. And they are very hard to escape. And you know what? Your faith, the fact that you're even in this church today, might simply because of family tradition. About 3 weeks ago, Friday night I was playing a basketball game with a group of friends, and I had the opportunity my friend who invited me, he's a Mormon, and I got introduced to the bishop of the Mormon church over off Butler Hill Road. And so we got a chance to talk and visit a little bit. And to be fair, I really don't know much about what they believe. I know very, very little. The most of what I've heard about it comes from people who aren't Mormon. And so I'd rather hear it from them. And so anyway, we started talking, and I just kind of made the comment. I said, I grew up in the Christian churches, the non-denominational churches my whole life, and I'm still in it to this day. And my friend next to me says, well, I grew up in the Mormon churches. I've been Mormon my whole life. I don't know any different. That's just what I do. And then the bishop was saying, there's most of the people in the Mormon church grow up in the church, but they don't have any idea why they're Mormon, why they believe what we believe, and why we think it's why we think it's right. And I said, well, I have a feeling that's probably true in most churches, regardless of denominational or religious leaning. Even outside the Christian umbrella, there's probably a lot of people who are simply the faith they are because that's what mom and dad were, what Papa and Grandma were. Now, if you're passing down the right faith traditions, that's a good thing. But there comes a point in your life where you need to mature beyond what mom and dad said, and you need to find out for yourself, who is God? What does God, who is he actually? What does it mean to follow him? How do I interpret these words in the Bible? Do I even believe the Bible at all? We need to take it seriously and develop what we believe for ourselves and not just follow the gods of tradition. And you know, in your family unit, you may pass down other traditions too. You might pass down a love of gambling. Oh, that's fun. Yeah, and you're perpetually broke and you can't figure out why. You might pass down a love of drinking too much. Oh, it's fun. It's a great party. Can't remember what I did. Yeah, it's going to destroy your life if you're not careful. You might pass down a love of sports. Oh, yeah, it's great. You never miss the big game. Well, that's fine, but maybe it interferes with living a fulfilling life in other ways. Or maybe you pass down a thought that you're never good enough. Maybe you pass down the tradition that you're always behind. You can't catch up. You never can accomplish anything on your own. So maybe you have some gods of tradition in your own life that are impacting how you choose to live your life. Secondly, there's the gods of the trend. The gods of the trend, the things that are popular. Israel was moving into a new land. The Amorites lived there, and they had different gods than they had in Egypt. They worshipped them in different ways. There would be a chance to see what's shiny new toy that I get to play with. Oh, this looks like fun. I'm going to worship with an Asherah pole. Or I'm going to worship the god of Molech. Or these other things that they were going to be experiencing. We know throughout the Bible that this was very common. Happened to Solomon, wisest man who ever lived. Yet it says when he married 700 wives of noble birth and 300 concubines. We know the 300 concubines were strictly for pleasure. And we know that the 700 wives, it says, led him astray where he worshipped their gods. And so Solomon tried the things that were trendy and that were fun. And then he wrote the book of Ecclesiastes and said it's all meaningless. So he tried the gods of the trend and it did not work. And so I started asking myself, what are the trends of today? And there's a few. There's hedonism, which is the love of pleasure. We have people who just seek pleasure all the time in any form. There's humanism, believing that humans are the highest ideal in form, and anything that makes you feel good about yourself is something you should do. There's a big movement in spirituality. This is a real big thing right now. Spirituality is the idea that you believe in something outside of the physical element, but you're not sure what it is. It's a little mysterious. You might experience spirituality through yoga. You might experience it through meditation. You might experience it through, through just quiet times on your own or through prayer. But it's often disconnected or divorced from any group, any body, any religious structure at all. And that's dangerous when you're disconnected and on your own. Because then how do you determine what's right or wrong? How do you check yourself? Where's the balance to be found? It's a very dangerous way to live. The gods of the trend, though, they'll hit you. But then there's the God of truth. Joshua says there's also one other thing you could do. You could follow the God of Israel. Joshua laid out the facts that there is one true God. Chapter 23, verse 14, he put it out there that there is a God and his promises have never failed. He repeated it twice. And then in verse 15 of chapter 24, choose this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. I find that very interesting. Joshua was the leader of Israel. He could have said, our national policy is going to be to follow the God of Israel. And so if you don't like it, get out. But he didn't do that. He gave the people free choice to do that. Now, I know what you were thinking. If you're really thinking cleverly, you might say, Mark, you said that we need to make a free choice. And that Joshua just said that, choose whatever you want, but as for me and my house, we're serving the Lord. It doesn't sound like the people in his house have free choice. You are correct. As a spiritual leader, you are responsible to guide your family unit in what you think is the right way to live. And Joshua says, I'm going to raise this family of mine up to follow the God of Israel. But there will come a point that they will mature, they will hopefully move out of the house, and that they will begin their own lives, And as a result, they have a decision to make. Who are they going to follow? And if you raise them, hopefully, with the right guidelines, the right structure, they will follow the God of Israel. Ultimately, they still have to make that choice for their own. So as a spiritual leader in your own house, you have to help set the direction. You have to help set the guidelines for what matters most, what is most important for you. Choose who you will serve, who your family will serve, and hopefully, as Proverbs says, raise a child in the way they should go, and when they're older, they will not turn from it. Hopefully that becomes true for you. All right, last word is conduct. Our word is conduct. So we're going to be in Joshua chapter 24. We're going to pick it up in verses 16 through 18. This is on page 237. Then the people answered, "Far be it from us to forsake the Lord to serve other gods. It was the Lord our God himself who brought us and our parents out of Egypt from the land of slavery and performed those great signs before our eyes. He protected us on our entire journey and among all the nations through which we traveled. And the Lord drove out before us all the nations, including the Amorites who lived in the land. We too will serve the Lord because he is our God." And so they're responding back to Joshua's challenge. Who are you going to serve? And he chose to serve. And they said, we're going to serve the Lord. And ultimately, that's the question. How will you conduct yourself? Who will you serve? Who will you listen to? Maybe that's a real big question we need to think about today. Who are you going to listen to? Because if you're not careful and you listen to the people of the world, you're going to have to change your behavior every minute. I'll give you a story. There was a man and his son who were walking to town with a donkey. They had the donkey tied to a rope, and they're both walking on the road leading the donkey. They pass by somebody who says, well, that is just ridiculous. Here they have a perfectly healthy donkey. Both people are walking, expending energy when they don't need to do it. The man and the son looked at each other and said, well, I guess he makes a point. So the son climbs up on the donkey, and they continue on to town. They run into another person who says, well, isn't that just cruel? This young man is riding the donkey when he's healthy. The old man is being forced to walk. How rude. I said, well, all right. So the old man climbs on the donkey with the son. They keep going along, and someone says, oh, how terrible that both of them would sit on that donkey and make him work so hard when they could both be walking and save the donkey the trouble. So the man and the son get down off the donkey, figuring out what to do next. They continue their journey down the road, and the next person looks at him and says, how ridiculous. A man and his son are carrying a donkey. You know, and that's really what it comes down to. When you listen to people around you, everybody's going to criticize you. Everyone's going to find something wrong with what you believe or what you do. You need to quit making your decisions based on what the people around you are saying, and you need to start making your decisions based on what God thinks about it. Because at the end of the day, his opinion is the only one that matters. His opinion is the only one that has eternal consequences or blessings attached to it. You know, one of the very last things we hear about the life of Joshua, he's called a servant of the Lord. It's that simple. It's not flowery. It's not this elaborate statement. It's simply Joshua was a servant of the Lord. And so as the worship team joins me on stage, I ask, what will be said of you? What will be said of you? What will the title be on your tombstone? What will people think of you when they consider your life? I think when Paul wrote some of his final words in 2 Timothy, he said he was being poured out like a drink offering, and he says, I've fought the good fight, I've finished the race, I've kept the faith. I think of Jesus' final words when he gave the Great Commission. When he said, go into all the world, preaching the good news, baptizing people in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you, and I'm with you always to the very end of the age. I think of all these final words, these final thoughts, and ultimately, I think for us, it's living a life of being bold. It's living a life of being bold. When people think of me, I want them to think of someone who lived boldly for God. The last line of Find Us Faithful says this: after all our hopes and dreams have come and gone, and our children sift through all we've left behind, may the clues that they discover and the memories they uncover become the light that leads them to the road we each must find. Oh, may all who come behind us find us faithful. This morning, have you been living for him? Have you conducted yourself in a manner of being bold. And if not, you've got time to start living boldly for Him right now. You need to consider the options before you. You need to make a decision, and then you need to conduct yourself according to your decision. Choose this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. This morning, if you have a decision to make, you meet me down front as we stand and as we sing.